mean, my perspective on it is the contract needs to be specific as to what you can do and what you can't do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. A typical residential contract is not assignable.
Okay.
Okay. Like every attorney in New York, or at least, Long Island, the boroughs for the most part, uses the same form contract. Okay. And then the attorneys either modify it by, adding a rider or by marking up the form contract. Form contract says that contracts are not assignable. To the extent that you know what your deal is going to be, you make it assignable. So, my feeling is it's a negotiated term. If the seller is aware as to what's going on and they have an assignable contract in there, then you should be able to do it. Now, you're going to get a lot of people that are going to say, well, it's not above board. The seller thinks that they're selling it to a particular person, and it turns out they're selling it to somebody else. And, at the end of the day, we know what the wholesale bid is. They're just, they're putting a piece on top. They're putting their vig on top, whatever it is, and they're selling it to a third party. They're taking their piece of the closing. The seller gets the money that's on the, the amount that's on the initial contract.
Mm-hmm.
And then everyone walks away, and I'm not sure that it's been tested. I have to imagine it probably has, but I'd have to do a little research before I could give you a straight, 100% yes or no. But it's a pretty popular practice, particularly on Long Island, because, like I said before, you make money when you buy. And, there are a lot of people that either, a lot of estates, people that have passed on and, and the family needs to fire sale the house because they don't want to be bothered with it. And you have, there's opportunity, and a lot of these opportunists or wholesalers that'll get that deal under contract and then pass it off to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So what I know, and I know some states are significantly more harsh and more aggressive on don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
The way I always looked at it, because you're 100% right, is I always felt if the seller knew what he was doing and it was in the contract, it was assignable, you were less wrong than if you tried to pull one over his eyes, because then you're almost acting as an agent and not representing his best interest. So I always assume, say, hey, listen, you go into this right away saying, I'm an investor, I'm going to flip the contract, I have a list of buyers. If he says okay to that, I think now I'm not a lawyer, but I'm a really good arguer. I think that person has a lot less of a battle than, going in there saying, I'll give you $100,000 when it's worth $5, right? Mm-hmm. That's just egregiously robbing someone, which is fine. And if the guy's willing to sell it for that and it's a fire sale situation, that's, buyer beware or seller beware. But, I don't think, the tough part in Long Island is that the opportunistic people, they get that because that's what they do. They're in that business. Mm-hmm. But when you try and set out to wholesale in Long Island, the struggle that some run into, in my opinion, is that you go in there and you're trying to offer people $200,000 and the house is worth $400 on the market. It doesn't take, they're not very easily that, they can say, well, I'm going to give it to you for $2 if I could sell it for $4 tomorrow. So it's like, that was always the struggle for me, and I wholesaled a couple houses on Long Island early on, like 2012, 2013. And that's where I was running into problems. Like I was offering people money and they're like, my neighbor's house just sold for $600. You wanted to give me $320. And I'm like, but that's because your house isn't worth $600. But no, I agree with, how you said it, as long as it's in the contract and it's understandable, I think there's less argument, but that's from my standpoint.
Yeah. And one of the other things that some people do, and it's not considered a wholesale, is they'll actually take title to it and put it back on the market the next day. Mm-hmm. So the whole idea of the wholesaler is that the wholesaler, they're considered a contract vendee. They never actually take title to the property. Mm-hmm. They literally will, flip it at the table. But you can also have a client that'll just buy it, take title to it, okay, and either they have a buyer lined up, or they could hypothetically put it on the market the next day. Obviously it'll cost them a little more money because, they paid to record a deed and, maybe they have to pay a realtor or whatever it is. So it might cost them a couple more bucks, but, that's another way that some people go about doing it.
Yeah, that's a clear cut way that, if you want to
Yeah,
avoid any headaches, you
yeah.
just don't move.
That's arguably that's the cleaner way to do it for sure.
Yep.
I have another question. I heard, and I don't know if this is true, that when you go into a contract and you're going to wholesale, you technically have to go into contract with the intention to buy, and you should be able to have the ability to close on that property. So if you're trying to wholesale a $500,000 house and you need, call it $15,000 to $20,000 if you were getting an FHA, and you don't have that technically you would be in breach or whatever. Is that correct?
I mean, not necessarily, because the contract says, it depends on, obviously every contract is going to,
Of course,
read differently. If, I'm trying to think of any that I've done recently. I have one under contract right now, and it's a non-contingent deal.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So this particular client, he has the means to buy it if he needs to. Okay, he could pay cash for it if he needs to. He doesn't want to. Like I always tell people, like what you just said, not necessarily that it's not enforceable, but I always tell clients, if you're going to wholesale, you should go into with the understanding that you're either going to lose your down payment, or you should be able to close and purchase a property and do whatever you're going to do with it. But I don't think there's anything particularly in the language. I mean, you could argue that it's bad faith if you go into it never having the intention of purchasing, and instead just trying to flip it. You could make the argument you were never going to buy this house in the first place. But in that case, if that wholesaler doesn't wind up closing, then he or she's going to forfeit their down payment anyway, and that arguably, whether or not it's true, that's going to make the seller whole. Seller gets some money for his time, and then moves on to the next.
Gotcha.